Hopefully everybody has remembered who traditionally sits in which rows and in which positions from past years. If you didn't call placebacks from last year's LPC, too bad. Okay, feels like we're nearly there. Welcome, everyone, to our first LPC meeting of the legislative session. It's good to finally be underway after discussing a lot of things over the interim. We have a new system for how we check in. So if you were in the hallway looking for the papers to sign in, you can stop. We are going to be trying a digital sign-in system using these QR codes to make sure that we have the right LPC members here and voting for each city. So please go ahead and pull out your phones and get signed in if you are an LPC voting member. And then the other QR code will take you to the league's bill tracking system so you can follow along digitally. We will be doing this meeting on Mondays, same bat time, same bat channel, except for the week of President's Day, where we will be shifting to Tuesday that week, just so that you're aware. And in terms of housekeeping, please remember that we do have members of the LPC that are joining us online. So when you have a really brilliant or thoughtful comment on a bill, wait for the league staff so that we make sure that we can have those online members be able to hear you and participate as well. And then per usual, wait until the end of the meeting. That's when we'll be doing a motion to ratify positions on the bills. I think that was all the housekeeping things I was assigned, Justin.
Yeah. Did you do minutes already? Did I miss it?
Oh, we did not do minutes, so it was not all the housekeeping things I was assigned. Has everyone had a chance to read, digest, thoroughly study, and absorb the minutes from our last LPC meeting? All right, we have a motion from Gary Hill of Bountiful. We have a second from Mayor Tran of Kaysville. Motion to approve the minutes. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Now I'm done. They're all yours.
Thank you. All right, thank you. I appreciate how excited you are about the minutes. I know I go back and watch them often. So a couple of things. Bill tracker is up there. If you want to look at bills right now, you're going to see a lot of position pending. There are over 500 bills drafted right now. We are furiously updating the bill tracker. So there's a lot of position pending because we're still digging in there, figuring out what we want to do with some of these bills. So if you have a position that's suggested, shoot it over to us. That's great. But just know that we're not position pending because we're indecisive. We're position pending because we're trying to figure out where a lot of these things are at. And there's also many bills that we're already negotiating on. And so we know there's substitutes coming. We know there's going to be changes, hence position pending. One other position that you'll see on there is the position of monitor. That was not a position we had in previous years. There are dozens of bills out there that touch on what you do as cities that we need to be aware of, but we don't necessarily need to engage in any way, shape, or form. And so those are just monitor. We don't do much. We just watch them, and then we maybe tell you about them later. But those are the new positions you're going to see on there. But I would like to give a shout out to over here in the side here. We got Megan Jacobs. She's our full-time intern for the session. And say hi to Megan. And then Alexa Oldham, our new policy analyst. Not that you all necessarily care, but we've never at this point in the session had so many bill summaries done. We get those in there, and they've already got most of those updated. So they're phenomenal. We're grateful to have them part of the team. Just want to give them a quick shout out. A couple other things just to be aware of. Again, the LPC sign in. If you need to update your LPC roster, so the members who are part of the LPC from your city, we need that preferably by the end of today, but we'd accept it by the end of the week as well. That just helps us keep things up to date as we take votes and know who's on there. So if you need to update your LPC roster, if you've had people change on your council move, or if you're just appointing new people, shoot that over to Cassidy. If you don't have Cassidy's email, which is easy to find, shoot it over to Carson and I. We can get that over there as well. But just need to get those updated. And then the last update is we send out the nightly emails, but not on Friday. So we send Friday facts out on Friday. So if anyone was like, oh man, I didn't get the nightly email on Friday, but you got Friday facts, you're covered. That's all you're getting. So don't get too excited about getting 2 emails on Friday. You're just going to get the one. And with that, going to turn over to Cameron to talk about Utah Housing Plan with our guests. Oh, you can talk about that part. You want me to do this part? All right. So we always talk about how we are the last people in the lobbyist lounge, and we should have done like a wide picture so you could have seen the whole lounge. But this is last Friday, 10 to 6, and we were in fact with Kate Bradshaw, the last people in the lobbyist lounge. We just want to document that. We'll later show you pictures where we are the last cars in the parking lot as well. We'll get around to that. And then Cam, you can talk about this one.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks. Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Justin. We thought that was a picture-worthy moment, and so Kate, thanks for humoring us with the photo there. Okay, as a reminder, our 3 pillars: respect, collaboration, and outcomes. And the key messages around partnership, not preemption. The state doesn't have a surplus, and neither do cities. Basically, every conversation we have at the Capitol with legislators starts with these 2 messages, and then we narrow it down based on the specific topic. And then we have the unique principles based on topics such as housing, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Before I introduce Steve, several people asked me about the paper chain that my daughters make each session. So there we are at the paper chain last week. My oldest daughter turned 7 this week. So how many of you remember when she was born during the session 7 years ago? Yeah, quite a few of you. So she's 7 now, and she would tell you if she were here, she loves January because it's her birthday. She hates January because it's the session. And I think we can all agree with that. So with that being said, let's jump in and talk a little housing. These are all the moving pieces. You've seen this slide for the last few months, and there are a lot of bills moving forward in this space. There was an interesting article yesterday in the Salt Lake Tribune that I wanted to highlight because I think it sets the stage nicely for the housing plan. This is Dan Perlick, who spoke at the LEAD convention a couple of years ago, talking about missing middle housing. And there are a couple of his quotes that I wanted to call out. First, in the second to last paragraph, he references that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution for every community and figuring out what makes sense in each type of community. In the second paragraph, he says there's a lot of validity to the state stepping in and helping because of the extent of the problems. Notice he didn't say stepping in and preempting and taking it over, but state stepping in and helping. And that's one of the core principles around the state housing plan approach to date has been how do we ensure we're working together, state, local, and private sector as we plan for growth. So with that, you saw this slide last time. We can now say phase 1 coming soon. Phase 1 is here. And you will be getting an email after this meeting today with the link to phase 1 of the housing plan, with a Qualtrics link for you to provide feedback back to us as league staff. We will aggregate it from all the cities and then take it back to Steve Waldrip, Laura Hanson, and the rest of the team as we get ready for phase 2, which will start up in earnest in the spring. The deadline for that input back to the league is March 19th. So there are 2 parallel timeframes here for data requests. There's the data requests that we ask where we say, here's this bill, and we need data about how it impacts your city yesterday. And then there's the time frame around the housing strategic plan, where we want you to take your time to really dig deep into what you see there and give us that broader feedback by March 19th. And then after the session, we'll collect all of it, aggregate it, and share it with state leaders. And then phase 2 will get underway in the spring. So with that, I want to introduce Steve Waldrip, who is the governor's senior advisor for housing, and Laura Hanson, who's is the chief plan. What's your title, Laura? Is just about to stutter on it. As chief planning, senior advisor for long range planning, and the 2 of them have been spearheading the efforts around the state housing plan. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you, and you can do what you usually do. Just hold it up.
Thank you. Great to be here again with all of you. And again, let me start out by expressing my appreciation for your service. I know you guys are getting paid the big bucks to be here on a Monday morning or Monday noon. And like Cameron, Friday afternoon at 6, I'm going to add you to my 6 p.m. Friday evening call. I call Mike Ostermiller every Friday night between 6 and 7. And he always yells at me. He's like, you work for the state. Go home. So thank you very much for your service, for your input, your leadership, your feedback. And as Cameron said, we're trying to craft something that hasn't been done in our state before. So historically, the state has never really had to get into market rate housing, right? I mean, we've never had to do that. The market has always taken care of market rate housing. We've been very involved in low income housing. We've been very involved in homelessness, but we are in a new universe now. There was an article in the, I think it was in the Times, or actually I think it was Forbes, where in order to return to 2019 housing levels, home prices would have to decrease 40% or incomes would have to go up 70%. Neither one of those things is going to happen anytime soon. The median cost for a home is now over 6 times the median income. Historically, it's been 3. So our buying power as citizens, as workers, has been cut in half. That's why we are now having to get into this space. I don't want to be in this space. I wish I didn't have to have this job, but that is the reality, and it's going to be the reality for the next 20 or 30 years. We also know that we have a supply deficit. Last year, we'll get the final numbers, but our deficit went up by maybe 5,000 units, 7,000 units, somewhere in that neighborhood. So we're trending in the wrong direction. And until we get supply caught up with demand, we're going to continue to see price pressure. We're going to continue to see issues. And so part of what we want to do is, with this strategic plan, identify both short-term and long-term goals that will enable us to work together to solve this issue and have a streamlined process so that we're not pulling one direction, the legislature's pulling another direction, the cities are pulling another direction. We want this to be a unified plan where we can pull together to achieve common goals. And so the first part of this is really critical. We've identified in phase 1 the goals and the metrics. We don't want to talk about tactics. We don't want to argue about how we're doing things. That comes later. We're going to figure out how we do things later on. Once we decide collectively what our goals are and how we're going to measure success. Once we get past that point, then we can start to look at tactics and how we implement policies and procedures and things that can actually make those goals happen. But if we don't agree on the goals and we don't agree on how we're going to measure them, we're never going to get to a point where we're pulling together at the end of the day. So that is what we're totally, completely focused on right now. That's what you guys will see when the email comes out. Focus on those things. Laura Hanson has done a masterful job of coordinating a whole herd of cats. If you remember that old Super Bowl commercial where the cats are running on the range, that's Laura's job right there. And there's some of the cats in this room, you know how fun you are to corral. Yeah. So that is what we're focused on right now. There will be bills during this legislative session. I'll come back and we'll probably spend another time talking about some of that legislation as the CHA bills come out. We'll have 4 CHA bills, and then there's some other bills around housing. But today we just really want to focus on strategy, strategic plan, long-term outlook, and making sure that you guys feel like your voice is being heard and that your comments are getting integrated. I already know one set of comments I've gotten from some rural legislators and community members is that we need a more of a focus on rural issues as a separate and standalone thing. And I think that's very wise. Rural issues are different than issues along the Wasatch Front. Some of the solutions will be the same, but we need to make sure we identify those rural things. So that's one piece of feedback we've already gotten. With that, I'll just turn it over to questions. If anybody has any questions, well, I've got time here until they kick me out.
Thank you for what you're doing to keep it all together. But one of the questions I have as a mayor of a city is, what is the governor going to be addressing infrastructure, i.e. sewer, water, pipes? Aging infrastructure is another issue as we overload that infrastructure. Oh, Kathleen Alder from Providence.
Thank you. Great question. If you asked me what the #1 issue we have in housing today is, I would say infrastructure. And not just local infrastructure, but large regional infrastructure. We have a great structure for transportation where we tax, gas tax and other taxes, where we create infrastructure planning. We don't have the same structure around water, sewer, power, gas. We don't have that around our other utilities. And when I look at areas where we have capacity to grow, and we aren't implementing that growth, it's because of infrastructure. And when I hear back from communities, I think, Cameron, you said last year we had what, $100 million, $150 million? We got over $1 billion of requests. Was that 2 years ago? 3 years ago. Yeah. So we know that we're woefully short. I would encourage you, we have several legislators that are talking about this issue. I think that the best way to deal with this, and this is the gospel according to Steve, so just take it out of the canon here. But we've got a governor and a legislature that has promised the Olympics will cost the public nothing, right? So we're dealing with that. We know housing is going to increase leading up to the Olympics, and so there's going to be an impact from this growth on all of us. However, I think that if the state were to issue a bond and fund a refundable or repayable bond issue, and I think it would need to be several $billion, that then the municipalities could apply for. We have the process in the State Infrastructure Bank process already set up. If the state is paying for it, impact fees, rather than going to the cities because that money has come from the state, would go back to pay back that fund and create a revolving fund, not a revolving fund, but a payback mechanism so that we can demonstrate, and again, politically, they're going to have to demonstrate this is not going to be an additional tax put on the citizens of Utah, but by and large, it needs to be paid back by the beneficiaries of those investments. So that's kind of the framework. It's a very early framework. We have some legislators discussing it. I wish I could say we were hot and heavy on that this session. I'm going to keep pushing that, and I would encourage you to push that as well, because I don't see another way to deal with the volume of housing. And I think you've all seen the numbers, 200,000 new things by 2030. It's a big number. It's almost 20% of what we have today in 6 years. That's a frightening number. But I think if you guys are engaged and we're engaged, we can do it right. We can create opportunity without sacrificing quality of life if we have the funding in place and the thought in place and the planning in place to make sure that happens in the right way. So great question. I would encourage each of you, when you're done here, call your legislator and say, why don't we have a state infrastructure bond that is repayable by municipalities as they develop? The fees that come off of that development could then go back to repay that fund. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Waldrip, we've had conversations regarding Sitla property being utilized for affordable housing in the southern part of the state. We are, I don't know if we're worse off, but we experience very high land costs. Could you just give an update on the use of Sitla with the GOP back in the White House? We've got Senator Lee's houses bill that now will probably move forward in some form, and how that would tie in.
Yeah, excellent question. So Sitla, oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Kurt Ivey, Washington City.
Thank you, Kurt. Sitla has been very changed, I would say, over the last year. I think they heard the war drums beating in the legislature about how they're not helping people get into affordable housing. They were just focused on making money, which again, you can argue that's their only mission, or you can argue it's their main mission. I think they've come off it being their only mission, and now they're saying that's our main mission, but we can also contribute to attainable housing. So they are looking at models where they're looking for developers to come in with the municipalities and saying, here's how we can create attainable housing, potentially by if you think about, you have 1,000 things you can build on this Sitla property by current zoning, and we're going to build 1,200 things, but only 1,000 of them are going to carry the land cost. Those other 200 aren't going to carry the land or infrastructure cost. And so that would allow those things to be sold at a significantly reduced cost, with deed restrictions appropriate to recapturing that cost and making sure that cost stays in place for a long time. The federal government, I don't know if anybody of you saw the article in, what was the magazine? Do you remember which magazine that was? I'll send it to Cam. He can send it out to everybody, but it was within the boundaries of cities in Utah, there are some hundred thousands of acres of BLM and Forest Service land. And within 1 mile of city boundaries, it was another 600,000 acres or some ridiculous number like that. That's the low-hanging fruit. Senator Lee has had his Houses Act. Senator Curtis, I think, is going to engage in that space as well. That is very, very low-hanging fruit. Southern Nevada, they've been doing a, buy it for $1 BLM land program for quite a while. It's been very successful. And I think that's something we're going to replicate here. We're going to model that over the next year with some UDOT land that we have identified as either surplus or below optimal use, where we can take some of those UDOT parcels and look at redeveloping those with, UDOT, they're going to be on transit, they're going to be on freeway interchanges where we do a little bit higher density on those parcels. And the state has the land, so we can contribute the land at whatever price we want it to contribute at, and make sure that that gets to the end of the row so that the home buyers can buy. We're targeting condos between $250,000 and $350,000 as starter condos in our communities where it's really, really difficult to find anything under $500,000. So that'll be an effort. We're going to pilot that this year, see what structure we can create around that system, and then we can apply that, I think, out across what we hope are many more opportunities with federal land and other state lands. Thank you so much, everybody. You've got the best team here. Alexa especially. I trained her. No, she trained me for 6 months, and now she's going to train Cam and Justin. So.
All right, thanks, Steve. Really appreciate you coming and being here. And like I said, watch for that email to come out right after this, and get the feedback in. All right, let's move on to water. Talking about water bills. A few water bills we want to talk about this year. First one, HB 274. So this one is being run by Representative Casey Snyder. What it does in essence requires consideration of water conservation when you're setting water rates. By July 1st, 2027, it includes water conservation as an element in determining the rate change for at least the highest usage block when you have tiered rates. So this rate's intended to help increase conservation. The additional fees raised from this cannot be used for for-profit dividends or for salaries, but goes toward conservation efforts. There is another piece of this bill, it's not up here, that deals with secondary water metering. We knew when secondary water metering went in, at some point there would be some enforcement coming down on that. The date that is in the bill on this is sooner than the date that you have to have the secondary water metering done. And so we know there's going to be changes to that one, so we're not talking about that one quite yet. We know that's a change that's coming. So want to bring this up. We have a position pending on this one. We've talked about it with city managers, with several of you, sent it out for feedback. Just looking for thoughts, questions, concerns about this bill as we go on it. So yeah, back here to Ken.
Yeah, thanks. Ken Leatham, North Salt Lake. We adopted water rates to do this a few years ago, about 3 years ago. I would just say on the provision about additional fees, the impact on our city is our revenues decreased. And so I think we're going to find that to be the case. That means people are conserving.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that there's a way to really say, okay, we have excess revenue, or we're going to not be able to use revenue somehow for salaries, or I don't know what that for-profit dividends really means. We're not a private
Yeah, that
company,
would apply
so-
here.
But I would just say, as we talk to people about this bill, we're really going to experience less revenue, not an excess of revenue, even though we're raising rates.
Okay, great. Up here, Gary, you had your hand up. Right up here, second row, Megan.
Thank you. Gary Hill, pardon me, Bountiful City. Many cities already do this, but I wonder what the sponsor's intent is if, and we're already using that additional tier to pay for the infrastructure and everything that the water fees go for. Is there going to be some expectation that if we have already have a tiered structure, that we're going to have to now divert some of our current funding for conservation efforts?
So I don't believe there is that expectation. We're sitting down with Representative Snyder tomorrow to get a little bit more information about that. So I'll find that out if that's what he's expecting. But many of you already do tiered rates. Our hope is this shouldn't change much for many of you that are already doing this.
Justin, Sean Guzman, St. George City. Mine goes along with what Gary Hill said, and I'm not sure that Washington City does the same thing. What we do is a conservation rate starting in the spring and going through the summer, because unlike the Northerners, we do have to use outdoor watering during the winter time as well. We use less. What I would be concerned about is if this had something so stringent that it didn't allow the flexibility that we need to do that type of thing. So if it gives us the flexibility, if we can continue to use the rates that we're doing, that we have, and we can show we did it for conservation measures, as Gary has said, then we would be okay. But if it forces us to do something that doesn't fit us in Southern Utah, then we'd want to take a look at that.
My read on it, Sean, is I don't think it would do anything that takes away that flexibility. It says you shall consider conservation as part of that, but I don't see a lot of change there. Expert in the back.
Hi, Nathan Breck. I represent a lot of cities, but I'm also a water attorney. Just my understanding with this bill is it stems from a report that the Division of Water Resources did. I think it came out late October, November. And one of the recommendations it made, and this also deals with other water providers too, is there are provisions in the code for municipalities and special districts that say that rates need to either be reasonable or tied to costs. And the problem with that is you have some entities where their costs are just low. And so their high-end rate just isn't high enough to really incentivize conservation. So and I don't want to speak for the sponsor, but when I read this bill, I thought it was trying to get at that recommendation to say, no, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to your costs, because you can consider conservation and set the price in such a way that it can incentivize that. I do think the bill needs work. I don't think that while I support that intent, I don't think it ties into all the statutes as much as it should to make that clear.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. That's great clarification. One of the important parts of that we're going to bring up here is that if you set a rate, if you set a high rate for that top tier, and you say it's for conservation, then the presumption is that is reasonable, which is a distinction with how rates are set right now. So in theory, yes, particularly the top tier, you could raise those rates in a significant way that aren't just tied to cost with conservation in mind. So again, we're gonna talk to the sponsor. We're not taking a position on this now. We want to see where some of this goes, but want to get some takes. Lynn, final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just one of the things you may want to bring up with the sponsor is, my understanding is that under state law right now, you can't use an enterprise fund as a profit center. So if you raise your top rates to encourage conservation, you can't raise revenue beyond what your costs are. So it may require a cost adjustment across the board. So we just need to make sure that we're not missing each other, because this isn't going to result in extra revenue beyond what our costs are. It's just going to reallocate where that money comes from.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for that, Lynn.
Lynn Pace, Sandy City.
All right, next one. HB 285, water infrastructure modifications, again from Casey Snyder. By no later than July 1st, 2028, as a condition of receiving state or federal financing or grants, the governing body of a public water system that is not a water conservancy district shall adopt a capital asset management plan. The governing body that adopts that plan then has to make sure it's updated every 5 years. This says it's basically as a condition of getting some of these state funds, in particular, the grants, you've got to have a capital asset management plan. It's not up on the board. You can read it. It's a whole list of what needs to go into that plan. This is something that's been talked about for several years. This isn't a shock, but I just want to get any knee-jerk thoughts or questions on this one. And if everyone's generally okay with that, then we can move on to the 50 other bills we need to talk about. Oh, Kate, you even made a face like you're.
I know I really didn't want to. Kate Bradshaw, Bountiful. It might be worth hitting pause on this one just to give entities time to think about how this impacts the funds that are involved. I know some of the sewer districts were thinking about, since they're not water conservation districts, what it looks like. So I might suggest we just leave it in position pending, because I think having some consultation with DEQ about what that looks like it'd be worth doing for.
Yeah,
those
absolutely. And there,
entities.
it's position pending, just, for exactly that. So we can see. And so if somebody in 3 days realizes something that this does that we didn't quite catch, please let us know. It's early in the session yet. We have plenty of time to work on things. So don't think just because you didn't speak now, you have to forever hold your peace. That only happens in 7 weeks. All right, jumping on to election day. Election bills. Let's jump to election day. Election bills. So several bills out there on elections this year. This first one I know you're all going to love. Mayoral recall elections. We're just, if you want to skip ahead, we're opposed to this one. You want to sign the petition for your own recall? It's a bold choice, Mayor. You'd be welcome to. So what this bill does, it allows a voter to file a petition to gather signatures to put the question of recalling the mayor on the ballot. Petition would include a description of the mayor's alleged conduct that constitutes a high crime misdemeanor or malfeasance in office, and they would need to collect signatures equal to 50% of the number of registered voters who voted in the previous mayoral race. Questions, comments? Dumb. Noted, Mayor.
Sherry Arn from Harriman. We definitely dealt with this in Harriman a few years ago. And so I'm not necessarily opposed to this bill. It's a very high standard that they have to meet. And if you're to the point where your mayor's in that situation, why should we take that away from the voters and the people he's representing to say, you can't represent us anymore? Mayors have a great power just in their title. And if your city is remiss of that, if you don't have that for 4 years in your city, trust me, it will have a major impact on your city. That could be 20,000 people in Harriman in that 4 years. So I'm not, don't look at it as a person, look at it as a policy. It's not anything against any mayor currently setting. It's just simply saying, if you get to that point where you're high crime, misdemeanor, malfeasance, why would you want them to continue and continue to guide your city, represent your city, and get taxpayer money from your city to do that job?
Well, and if I can respond to part of that. So, yeah, appreciate that perspective. No other officer in the state has anything like this. So this would be the first recall we would have in Utah. So I think part of the question, if we're going to do it for mayors, why not do it for everybody else? I'm not saying that's a good policy, but yeah, in just 1 second, heading to California. So we'll get several other comments. The other, I think, piece there is it's an allegation and there's nothing necessarily proven yet. So if you put it on the petition, that holds a lot of weight, saying we voters have tried this in court of the public, not necessarily trying in a court of something else. So I think there's some concern there. Yeah, to the back here.
Yeah, Tom DeSiren, Mill Creek. We're lucky we've got a really great mayor, Mayor Silvestrini. But I'd say I just really wanted to add what you had said. Basically, there's no other option to recall anywhere else in the state. If the legislators really want to put this up, we should make sure that it's amended to include them as well.
Okay, to the back.
Lisa Watts Baskin, North Salt Lake. This bill, I don't know how you can outright oppose this bill. If you've read it, there is a 50% of the voters to put the petition on the ballot. It has to be reviewed by the county attorney, and there's so many protections in place. And the reason why this is a good idea is that if you have a city where you have a mayor that is a problem right now under state code, the only way that mayor can be removed is through a court of law. They have to go to actual trial. And that is an impedance for people in a community who know there's problems.
All right, up here. To our Layton delegation.
Bettina Smith Edmondson, Layton City. I'm just posing the question to the group. If a mayor or any other person, whether elected or not, is involved in a crime, a misdemeanor, a malfeasance, can we not bring actual criminal charges. So I just don't understand why we would need to have the public weighing in on something when the public is not responsible for criminal proceedings. So I think this gives an unnecessary expectation to the public that their voice outweighs criminal action or lack of criminal action. And so I think there's no reason to follow through with something like this because we are not the court of law. And as you mentioned earlier, the court of public opinion can sometimes be much crueler than that. But if that's the case, then let's change what those laws, the criminal proceeding laws are. But I see no reason why we need to give the public, including ourselves, the opportunity to weigh in on this as though we have an authority in that area.
Okay, I have time for a couple more comments here.
Austin Gray, Clinton City. Just one thing I was reading is it says the number of registered voters who voted in the race. Lately, we've had like 30% voter turnout. So this would be 15% of your city would be able to kick out your mayor. So that's just something to.
Yeah, and that is a good point. It's 50% of the voters, not 50% of those who voted, not of voters. So depending what the turnout is, big or small, would have an impact.
I agree with the point about the trial process, but you have to understand also, but just because it doesn't get tried in a court of law doesn't mean they did it. It can be brought to the attorney, the district attorney, and they say, we just don't want to have to deal with this. That happens. And so it doesn't mean they didn't break the law. It just means that there's somebody that's not willing to prosecute the break of the law. Sherry Orrin, Harriman City.
All right, any final comments on this one? Oh, yep.
Todd Sheeran, Harriman. I think we support the removal of Mayor Palmer immediately, so.
Oh, for anyone who's online and you missed it, Mayor Palmer just walked out. And he sat back down.
The concern I have is there's no definition for high crime, and a misdemeanor can mean a lot of things. Operating a business without a business license in Harriman and probably most cities is a Class B misdemeanor. So I think there needs to be some guide rails on what the crime is and what constitutes removal.
All right, with that, Sean, you got a comment?
Sean Guzman, St. George City. Just to reemphasize again that this does not apply to any other elected official in the state. So once again, somebody's looking at one particular instance that happened, and we're going to craft a bill that's going to apply to all of us. Now, I can tell you what's going to happen. There are going to be situations where the point is well taken that you're 50% of those voters that voted in your last election, 30%, so you could have 15% of those disgruntled people come in and take the mayor out. They're going to backfill it with Justin Lee, who is a council member. And then there's an open council seat. And then guess who's going to apply for the open council seat? The mayor. And the council's going to go, we'll show you guys. We're going to reappoint the mayor now as a council member. And in most cities, besides the bully pulpit, it's the council members that have the power. So I don't think this has been thought through completely. But the fact that it only applies to mayors because of a situation is something that should cause us all to pause and say, listen, if this bill is good for mayors, it's good for all elected officials in the state. If it's not good for all elected officials in the state, then it's not good for mayors.
So our current staff recommended position is oppose on this one. And we're going to plan on opposing this unless there was a recommendation to go differently. But I don't really want to take that time unless someone really wants to go down that road. Okay, moving on. All right, two bills here. This is not an in-depth discussion about either of these bills, but we do want to talk about a couple of election bills, broadly speaking, and get your feedback on vote by mail in general. So a couple of bills out there, and there may be more coming. So HB 213, the basic gist of it is that voters will need to request a by-mail ballot by going to the polls in 2026 to get that by mail ballot for future elections. So in 2026, HB 213, not everyone is mailed a ballot. You'd have to go request that ballot. HB 300, ballots will be mailed to voters, but ballots must be returned in person with voter ID. If you're using a drop box, you must also show ID, meaning drop boxes will only be available during certain hours. So the reason we're bringing this up is election reform has been a big topic of discussion this year. These are two big pieces of legislation that are coming up in the House that we're not taking a specific position right now. We're going to see if there's changes or what anything looks like there. But we do have multiple questions around vote by mail and what that looks like for your city and what your take is on vote by mail. So before we even go to comments, pull out your phones. It is Slido time. See, everyone put their phones up. So you can join by scanning the QR code, or you can go to slido.com. 1849334 is the code. I'm going to give you all 15 seconds before we switch the slide and the QR code's still up there. Yeah, Carson, please.
Just a quick clarification. Any members, you're welcome to use Slido. We ask that you sign in with either your name or your city, just so we have an idea of where any potential concerns are coming from. When we ask for votes, those will be separate. That's voting members only. So I just wanted to clarify that distinction.
And this is more, yeah, we don't take votes by Slido. We pull you and get information by Slido. So anybody can respond to these ones. Even you, Nate. I saw the concern on your face. All right. First question, what has been the impact of vote by mail in your city? So select all that apply. Increased turnout, decreased turnout, increased cost, decreased cost, increased public confidence, decreased public confidence. Please don't pick all 6. That would be silly, but you can pick more than one. And the reason we're asking these questions is historically, we all have elections at the city level. The counties, for the most part, run the elections in the state. And so historically, there's been a lot of deference given to UAC, to the county clerk's, lieutenant governor's office on election items. That being said, if we're doing a major change to the elections, this will have an impact on you as cities for your election. So we do want to get input and figure out exactly how involved we want to be in these discussions and what that looks like. And this will help us get there. We still have votes coming in. We're going to give this about 10 more seconds. So what is the scope of the problem? That is a great question. There have been some audits done that found a couple small problems with elections. Now, let me put this in perspective. One of the audits recently found that there were, in fact, 4 deceased voters who had voted in the election. Now, that's not a good thing. I don't want to minimize that. That's an oversight that should absolutely be corrected and fixed. But in 1 million votes, 4 is not a particularly high number that would swing an outcome of something. There are things that can always be fixed in elections. There are things that need to be tweaked. Historically, I will just say that I wasn't going to do the whole history. I'll do the quick history. Vote by mail. In 2012, there was a bill passed that said any county or municipality could run their election by mail. From 2012 up to 2020, incrementally, more and more jurisdictions came on board. So there was never an overall mandate that said we as a state shall vote by mail. Organically, county by county, municipality by municipality, adopted vote by mail. We got there organically. So, and in some parts of the legislature, there's always been a hesitancy with vote by mail, but because it was an option and it happened organically, there wasn't really a way to quell that in some way. So there has been some concern with vote by mail for years from certain people, certain legislators, founded on audits or not. And again, not a perfect system. There's no such thing as a perfect voting system. I can break them all apart for you if you want. But that's where some of this is coming from, just some angst about vote by mail over the years, and from some audits recently. But I wouldn't point to one specific thing and say, this is the reason these changes are coming. It was the former elections director who was horrible at his job, and you're all stuck with him now. All right. How important is it to your city to continue using vote by mail? So it is a high priority. ULCT should be more focused on this than other issues. Is it a medium priority? The prospect of losing vote by mail is concerning, but there are issues with greater magnitude. Low priority, maintaining vote by mail is not a priority for my city. Not a priority, my city would like to stop vote by mail. If you have other, and again, we can take comments and questions on this, but this will help us kind of judge where we're at on things. We know not everybody likes vote by mail, and we're not saying that everybody has to like vote by mail, but we're trying to gauge where U.S. cities are at on this. So I'm going to give this a few more seconds. By the way, we likely have the highest turnout we have ever had for an LPC today. And the Slido results are showing that. So these are not paper tickets. These are real people in seats. It's a real audience. We didn't. All right, with that, we're going to jump to one more question. How do you feel about increasing voter verification with vote by mail? So several of these proposals that are out there are looking at ways to increase verification of vote by mail, whether it's showing an ID in person, having to regularly go in and show an ID, whatever that may be. But how comfortable or how do you feel about increasing voter verification? So very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, uncertain, somewhat concerned, or very concerned. Again, we're not asking you to take specific positions on the bills today. We will come back and take positions at a later APLC, but just want to get your takes. So with that, any comments that anybody wants to make out in the room about this? Thoughts or comments about vote by mail in general as we're looking at these issues? Yep, on the back here.
Jordan Hess, Washington City. So the requirement that you would have to show ID at a drop box, would those be volunteer poll workers verifying those IDs, or would it be official election staff in the counties?
So that's a great question. They'd be poll workers. So there's depending on the number of drop boxes you have, there's not enough full-time election staff that works in the county clerk's office to go out and verify those. Now, that being said, a lot of poll workers are not volunteer. They're actually paid and trained. So I'm getting very technical with your question, but it would be poll workers more likely than not. But poll workers are paid and trained. They're just temporary. Yep. Oh, Mayor Walker. Maybe we'll make you run way back.
Thank you. I know that voting by mail in my family is beloved. We enjoy it. We sit around. We vote together as a family. It's been something we've enjoyed. And I don't want to lose the ability to vote by mail because I think it has, without a doubt, increased participation in every election. It's a lot cheaper to put the election on. I am in favor, however, of verification, but I think verification ought to be at the front. When you register, you verify who you are at your registration. And then if you don't miss an election, you're registered, you're verified, you can continue to vote. I think the verification at the poll is not workable. And it takes away the beauty and the opportunity of voting by mail and the ability to do it. I don't know why we'd want to decrease voter participation unless we had some ulterior motive to do it. But I think voter participation is good, and I like voting by mail. If we can secure it up front, I think that's the way we should push, is for verification at the front.
All right, thank you, Mayor Walker.
Oh, Troy Walker, Mayor of Draper City. I'm league president this year.
He said that last part with a smile. We haven't beat him up too bad yet. All right, one final bill in this realm. So moving up that, and I will just say, if anyone has questions about how the voting process works in your county, please reach out to your county clerk. I know they're more than happy to take you on tours and show you what things do, how things operate, what things look like. If you have questions about it in general, feel free to grab me. I'm happy to walk through election stuff as well. So this bill, SB 56, Municipal Governance Modifications, sponsored by Senator Keith Grover, allows the council, there's multiple parts of this bill, but this is the one part we want to talk about, allows the council to 6-member council and 5-member council forms of government to retain or employ a person to assist the council in complying with requirements and duties. if the council retains that person, they have to have some things in the contract. But the takeaway here is this person does not report to the mayor. And the mayor doesn't have any way to, they're the council staff, they wouldn't be the mayor's staff in any way. And in a 5 or 6 member council form of government, that's a little strange when the mayor's on there. We've talked to Senator Grover about this. He held the bill in committee last Friday. It was up and he's held it so we can talk about concerns we have with this. Some of our concerns are, do we need 2 de facto city managers in a city if they were to have something like that? Or do they hire a council and we suddenly have a second city attorney that is giving different opinions than the other attorney, and now we've got 5 opinions because there's 2 attorneys. And so we just have concerns about what this looks like. We're opposed as drafted. Like I said, Senator Grover has said he wants to talk to us about this, but happy to take comments on this one as well. Behind us, Mayor Silvestrini.
Jeff Silver. So I don't even understand why we need this bill. We could do this if we wanted to. If a council member is on a 5 or 6 member council wanted to hire a consultant or advisor, there's nothing to stop them from doing that now. So this is unnecessary. This is totally just an extra bill.
Agreed. Mayor Ramsey.
So in our 6-member council, I am a member of the council.
Mm-hmm.
I don't vote. I chair the council. And if the council wanted to hire somebody and tell them they're not allowed to talk to me, I guess they could already. They could get 3 people to vote for it and say, but don't talk to, that's weird. I just don't think, this doesn't make sense. In a 5 or 6-member council form of government, the way it's set up, I just think this is weird.
Agreed.
Don Ramsey, South Jordan City.
Back to Mayor Silvestrini. He has one more.
Former president.
We'll take a comment from one more former president of the league. The mic's
one of the benefits that I see of the 5 and 6 member, council manager form of government is that the mayor is on the council, and that, Harriman excluded. It normally promotes. Get out of here, Mayor Palmer. It normally promotes collegiality and when the mayor is part of that group, there's not an executive veto and things like that. So this kind of thing would undermine that thing that I think is the fabric of good government in a lot of our municipalities.
Oh, wow. Last one.
This is the last one, just to state that South Jordan City is extremely grateful for Harriman Mayor Palmer.
So again, this bill was held last week. We're going to talk to Senator Grover about this. I think he didn't understand some of the ramifications of the bill, so we'll be following up on it. We just want to make sure this one's on your radar. If you have questions about it, that we're working on it. And that, turn it over to Carson to talk about short-term rentals, which Harriman doesn't have any of.
All right. So I'm excited today. After a lot of short-term rental battles in the past, I think there's a bill in front of us that I would not characterize as a sea change in policy, but I would characterize as a step in the right direction towards restoring the ability of communities to regulate their residential areas and to ensure that housing units are being used where appropriate. So this bill has 4 components. It's from Representative Walter, and I want to add that a lot of these components are actually concepts that the short-term rental working group has been discussing over the years. Some of you at LPC are participating in that, but we're excited to see these concepts come to fruition. So the first thing it does is it clarifies the not well language, so-called not well language. That is the provision in state law that requires, that prohibits municipalities from using the short-term rental listing as the sole source of evidence in a code enforcement proceeding. So it basically restates that what we've heard over the last couple of years is that there's a lot of ambiguity in the way the current language is written. And there's been even some litigation about that. So I know that there's been a chilling effect beyond the actual law. So we're hoping that even just clarifying the wording will maybe help reduce some of that ambiguity. The second piece, and this is kind of a 2-parter, and maybe this is even the most important part of the bill, is that it actually gives municipalities the authority to require the short-term listing sites to add a business license. So that's optional. But you could provide that information, but that would help the public understand which operators are legal, give them a competitive advantage over illegal operators. But it also just helps people who are interested in opening up a short-term rental know that they have to go and comply with your regulations. The second piece is it allows you to remove listings for illegally operating properties. And this can't be just anything under the sun. If somebody leaves their trash cans out for too long, it has to be specific to running a short-term rental in an area where that's not allowed, or operating a short-term rental without a business license. So these aren't necessarily new regulatory tools, but it does give you the ability to work with the listing sites where a lot of the commercial traffic is driven and help try to regulate and prevent the problem from occurring on the front end. Now, those two provisions only kick into effect if your municipality allows short-term rentals in at least part of the community. That could be in a commercial zone, that could be in a residential zone. It doesn't have to be your whole city, it just has to be in part of the city. So I want to just make sure everybody's aware of that. The final piece of this bill is that it allows the site listing to be used for tax compliance purposes. Now, what does that mean exactly? I'm not 100% sure. I think realistically what this looks like, because we're not the enforcement entity, this would allow you, if you were able to gather all of the short-term rental listings in your jurisdiction, take that information and the site listings to your county auditor and make sure they're at least not receiving the primary residential exemption. So making sure that businesses are actually paying the taxes that businesses should be paying. So that's probably the most direct benefit you'll see. It allows counties to escalate those to the State Tax Commission, and the State Tax Commission actually has an RFP out right now to try to improve, get better technology and enforce tourism taxes on those properties. So we as staff recommend a position of support on this. I'm open to any other questions. I know that we've brought this to the tourism community and they had some feedback earlier, much of which has been incorporated. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them.
Hi, Tana Tolley, Park City. Couple things on this. So one, allowing to have a business license in the field of registration not only helps the cities, but it also helps the guests ensure that they're actually getting a safe and licensed place to stay. So I think that's good for both. This is supported by our lodging association and our property management companies who are, because they're legit companies that are paying in every single year, and then they also are putting in business licenses. And for us, one of the big things that we've heard is this is actually a way to ensure safety and welfare of our guests who are coming into the town, because this is really one of the only ways that you're able to see who's in your town. And so if there was a fire or something were to happen, especially for Park City being in like a box canyon, we know who's licensed and we're able to get that information out to them, versus it being, we have no clue who's in these places. We don't know how long they're staying, and we don't know the shape of the actual accommodation that they're staying in. So those are a few other tidbits besides just regulation of why we would want business licenses.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Kate Bradshaw, Bountiful. The other clients would be for cities that have enacted a transient room tax. You'd be able to take the listings and ask the tax commission to confirm that those entities are remitting. So that could be an important tool for municipalities to have a TRT.
That's correct. And there will probably need to be, that will probably not actually work until the tax commission has their RFP totally filled out, because right now, most of the big listing sites just remit in bulk. I'm hopeful that some of that new technology will help that issue a little bit and break it down more.
Jordan Hess, not from Harriman City. Sorry. So one of the questions I have is these sites, often you don't know exactly where these listings are. They will just have the name of the city. Do you know if cities can have access to the back end to make sure that these are in correct zones? Because if it's just the name of a city as a whole, we are still going to have a problem tracking where they actually are.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think if you're really intent on using this, if this new tool passes and you're really intent on using that to the full extent that you can, I think you would probably need to contract with a vendor who does that kind of data mining and can get that information for you. You could probably do that manually, but to your point, it would take a long time to go through and try to find actual addresses. So yeah, I think many cities would just do it if the short-term rentals became a problem in a specific area, and then they could just do that on a problem-by-problem basis. More likely, I think communities would probably, if they needed to, just contract with one of the vendors. Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing any other hands, so we have about 30-ish minutes left. So if anybody has any additional comments or questions on this, please reach out to me. Yeah, thank you. Molly.
Hi. So there are a few policies that we want to go over today, 2 bills, and then some overarching policies that the league would like to suggest as we engage with all homelessness legislation this session. So as with a bit of background, the current policy landscape we're looking at, and I've given this for you a few times at LPC, so hopefully this isn't surprising. The policy landscape is changing pretty dramatically, and we don't know exactly how we're going to land yet. It's going to have big repercussions for mitigation, public safety, and more. This last December, the Utah League Board reaffirmed the staff principles that we're going to use when engaging on homelessness policy. We have a lot more stakeholders in this space than we have in the past, and there's limited coordination. And we know that a central campus is going to come online, and it's going to have significant impact on the system. It could nearly double the beds in the entire statewide system. Additionally, we know that current shelter cities are still subsidizing the costs of hosting shelters. In fiscal year 2024, there was about a $10 million deficit for shelter cities, and that was before Sandy and Tooele came online with their qualifying shelters, and we are still anticipating South Salt Lake's family shelter to come online. So as I mentioned, the League Board adopted principles that we're going to use when we address homelessness. And with the legislation that's both been released and that we are anticipating, there are 2 provisions that are in tension with one another. So one is that the League wants to collaborate with OHS to find ways to incentivize other cities to get involved in homelessness. The other is that cities that host homeless resource centers should be reimbursed for most of their direct and indirect public safety costs. So recognizing that those 2 are in tension and that we have legislation that is going to touch on both of those components, and that we have a massive campus coming online that is going to shake up the system, League staff is recommending a general approach to any legislative provisions that touch the mitigation fund, which is don't touch contributions to the mitigation fund, at least local contributions. So that means opposing legislative provisions that would increase municipal contributions to the mitigation fund, as well as opposing legislative provisions that would decrease contributions to the mitigation fund. Once we have a better idea of how this system is about to change, we are going to need to revisit the mitigation fund writ large. Once that needs to happen, we want to figure out how to do both of those things. How we can better support shelter cities, and how we can create incentives for other cities to get involved and recognize the other work cities are doing. So I want to put that out as an overarching piece as we get to one piece of legislation in particular, which is up in committee this afternoon. It is House Bill 118 by Representative Abbott. And this creates essentially an offset for cities to contribute less to the mitigation fund based on what they are doing to essentially contribute to the goals of the mitigation fund for shelter cities. So an example would be if Molly City normally has a contribution of $100,000 to the fund, but I have $50,000 in qualifying expenses, I get a 50% credit for those expenses, which then would reduce my contribution by $25,000, and I would then ultimately contribute $75,000. As you saw in the board principles, these are concepts we've explored in the past, but just given how much the system is changing, staff recommends opposing this policy. And again, as well as any policies that might increase municipal contributions, moving forward, or at least until we have an idea of how things are going to shake out. Are there any questions, comments, concerns on this bill? It will be in committee at 2 p.m. today.
Hi, is this, okay, I'll hold it up. Monica Zoltansky, Sandy Mayor. So Sandy's one of the newer shelter cities that has come online. We strongly oppose any reduction in municipal contributions. For so many years, Sandy paid full fare. We didn't host any shelter city, but we understood that this is a statewide problem. We need to stand in solidarity with our sister cities that are performing the important role of providing the shelter services. And now that Sandy is a shelter city, yes, our costs exceed the contributions and the reimbursements that we receive. But if the state wants more cities to come online and step up, as Sandy, Twilla have done, Cache Valley, Logan has done, we need the support, and this is not the time for other cities to be ducking out. There's no way of controlling how one city spends their money for homeless mitigation. It's something that we all are doing in addition to serving it as a shelter city capacity. It goes with the territory of our economy and our lack of affordable housing, but we should be fighting to protect the homeless mitigation fund for the cities that are stepping up to provide these essential services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else on this? Mayor Nadolski?
Thank you. Mayor Ben Nadolski, Ogden City, obviously as a shelter city, as much as we'd love to see an increase in the mitigation funds coming to us to offset the costs, especially if it comes from Mayor Walker, we can support not seeing an increase or a decrease. There's a lot of questions upcoming, especially with significant changes to a new facility. And we'd like to make sure that things remain stable until those things are settled out.
Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else?
Matt Dahl, Midvale City Manager. I just, first of all, I wanted to say that we're very appreciative of this fund. It is crucial to the operations of our city. When Midvale was required by the state to have the only primary family shelter in the state, that year we saw a significant amount of increase in crime in our community. This is not me saying that those experiencing homelessness are criminals. It is saying that there are people who prey on them, and there's a variety of things like that. With these funds, we were able to decrease the amount of impact that the shelters had on our community. And if there were to be a significant change in this program, it would be detrimental to us. And
it would be detrimental to Midvale. Sorry, we got the people online.
Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry. My voice is, I feel like I can't listen to my voice normally, but when it cuts in and out like that, it makes it harder. Anyway, so the bottom line is just that it's very helpful for our community. There are issues that are specifically unique to those communities that have homeless shelters, although I recognize that every community deals with people experiencing homelessness and the issues that are associated with that. Midvale does too, outside of that area around the shelter. So this is a huge deal to us. We support the position of neither looking for local communities to increase their contribution or to decrease it. But again, I just want to say that I appreciate all of the help that everyone has given to us and the unique situation that we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sheree Wood, Mayor of South Salt Lake City. We host the men's shelter, and soon we'll host the family non-congregate shelter. Our ability to mitigate the impacts in our neighborhood. We're a city of 26,000 residents, and so having 800 beds available for those who are homeless is very taxing on a small city. And so these funds are very vital for us being a good partner and managing the impacts to our community.
Thank you. All right, we are going to move on to the next piece of legislation. which is House Bill 329, Homeless Service Amendments by Representative Clancy. This bill is largely focused on requirements for service providers, including implementing a known-by-name system and increased regulations for service providers. It does not change contributions to the mitigation fund one way or the other, and it does maintain the 2 municipal seats on the 11-member Homeless Services Board. Provisions that do impact cities. So for those cities that receive funds from the mitigation fund, it includes within that tier 3 definition of an eligible city, year-round shelters with no minimum bed limit to the 3rd tier definition. Right now, the 1st tier starts at 80 beds, 2nd 25, and the 30 is that seasonal 50. It requires shelter cities to have and enforce camping ordinances that align with state code, and it prioritizes services that are related to bolstering the goals for the Utah Homeless Services Board and those that are primarily used for public safety expenses. And it also allows the board to award mitigation funds in full or in part. The big change that impacts most of you is that it largely changes winter response plans. So it erases many parts of winter response code. The winter response committees still exist, or the task forces, but they need to make recommendations each year to the Utah Homeless Services Board. It repeals provisions surrounding noncompliance and preemption, the rules, all the detailed plan requirements that need to be in. It also repeals the sunsets. So this would be something that would be ongoing. The original legislation had this next upcoming winter, the last winter. So there's a lot of changes here, and a lot of it we just want to make sure as staff we understand. So we are recommending a position pending as we just follow up with the representative to make sure we understand exactly what the bill means, what the impacts and implications it could have for local governments as we move forward. Any concerns with this one?
Victoria Petro, Salt Lake City, District 1. I have the Jordan River. I have North Temple. My kids have not played in a public park now for 6 or 7 years. The Know My Name concept is fantastic and has existed in other places so successfully. And honestly, a large part of what is so draining about this homelessness crisis is if I don't know if that person on the river trail just fell on hard times and had medical debt and needs someone to be kind to them and give them a hand up, or if that person is strung out of their mind and is going to traumatize my kids by reacting violently to a ball coming into their proximity. The Know by Name concept is really helpful with these things. It tracks them throughout a system. I'm a little concerned with all of this, but I have to tell you all, I don't want any of you to have North Temple in your towns. I'm sad that I have North Temple in my town. What I do want us to do is stand together that the state's statutory requirement to have a statutory plan to deal with health and human service outcomes is unified so that you all can take the 25 units of permanent supportive housing that Ogden is considering right now. And you can be part of the long-term solution. Here's what I'm nervous about with this. We are being faulted for a failure of what happened at Operation Rio Grande. When that happened, they always knew they were 300 beds short. They always knew they had to build out the rest of the system for people to flow through. And they always knew that they were going to have to go back and reimburse nonprofit providers more because their costs would increase. None of those things happened. And then COVID happened, and it was a whole lot more than 300 beds were behind. Here's the truth, and I'm speaking for Victoria. I'm not speaking for my whole city. This is not a whole city position. But people can come to stabilize in Salt Lake City. You shouldn't have North Temple. But we should be demanding from our state a unified plan that is strategic. And I'm not asking for unlimited resources. I'm asking for a strategy and then resources adequate to the strategy. It is not unlimited, but they can't Operation Rio Grande us again. So the first part of this is fantastic, and I think Representative Clancy is fantastic and doing fantastic work. Thanks, Provo, for sending him to us. I do want to make sure that, especially on these things, there is strategy and resourcing, and that we don't have to squabble over mitigation funds, but instead there is a unified health and human services strategy that allows us to return to our municipal role of public safety. Because my cops can't respond when your bike gets stolen if they're constantly moving someone who's camping someplace where they shouldn't be to the next place where they're camping where they shouldn't be, because there's no strategy for where people experiencing mental health crises, substance abuse crises, domestic violence crises, there's no place for them to go. That is health and human services. So thanks. That's a little bit of a soapbox. You can tell I ride it often, but that's my heartfelt plan.
Thank you. All right. Public safety, other types of public safety.
All right, and we're gonna fly through these next few things. There is a committee meeting here at 2:00. We'll start getting cleared out here in about 15 minutes. So HB 40 school safety amendments. New language is coming. Don't read the current bill. Don't waste your time on it. There's going to be something else out there. So if you're worried about that bill, that's great. There's changes coming. Done. Revenue.
Do you want me to follow your lead, Justin, there? Yeah. I will do my best to be fast. Okay, we talked about this briefly last week at Local Officials Day, the difference between a city-imposed tax and a city-imposed fee. And this is your little cheat sheet, because we often hear legislators combine the two of them together, and sometimes even our own members combining the two of them together. So I vetted this with Roger too to make sure it was accurate. The difference between the fee and a tax, how you impose it, who administers it, who authorizes it, what is it for, and then ultimately who pays it. So those are some of the key distinctions. And I bring this up because it's at the centerpiece of the discussion up here around the use of the transportation utility fee. Now, admittedly, only about a dozen cities right now have a transportation utility fee, but quite a few cities are looking at doing transportation utility fees. So last year, we spent a lot of time with Representative Karen Peterson on House Bill 367. She is going to bring back House Bill 367. We're going to refer to it as House Bill 367 2.0 until it's drafted and out. There will be some additional language in there, particularly around public safety fees and the methodology around transportation utility fees. So that's House Bill 367 2.0. Well, we often say we exist at the intersection of law, policy, and politics. So on the political piece, there is a big discussion up here right now over who all should pay the user fee for transportation. We're going to go to Slido questions in a minute, because we are going to have 3 rapid fire Slido questions for you to get a sense of how important this is in each of your communities. You'll see here, we've updated this slide from last week. We did have a meeting with Representative Bolander last week and another one tomorrow to talk through tourism taxes. We have a working group on that topic. So if you are interested in that issue but have not been part of our working group, please follow up with league staff immediately, because that one's moving quick. Okay, so Slido questions around transportation utility fee. Now, this first question is broader than the transportation utility fee. It's just about our overall fee authority, because one of the arguments we've made up here is that when the legislature comes in and scales back who can pay fees, it erodes your authority to set those user fees. And a key principle around a fee legally is all users pay for the use. And then the money can only be spent to offset that use. And you have to have that reasonable relationship. So how much of a priority is it for your city to defend municipal authority generally to impose user fees on all users? Okay, so let's start there with the broad question. I'll leave this up for just a few more seconds, and we're going to start narrowing the question here momentarily. Okay, I'll leave it up for about 10 more seconds. Okay. Next question. So if there was a bill to limit our authority to impose a user fee on churches and nonprofits, in other words, churches and nonprofits would not pay the user fee. They would still use the service, but they would not pay the user fee. Would you push your legislator to oppose it? And this gets to that intersection of law, politics, and policy. Is this could turn into a big fight. Is this a fight worth fighting? Okay, so this is the second question of, you're sitting across the way from your senator and your representative. Are you going to use your personal and city's political capital on this principle? Or would you say, you know what? In this particular case, certain users, we're okay with them not paying this user fee. Okay, we just got to get a sense of where everybody's at there. So I'll leave this open for a few more seconds as well. Okay, Megan, go, Roger's loud, but give him the mic.
Look, churches and other users do today pay users fees
Yes.
on a number of instances. So this is not a case of, this is the first time. Universally, fees are applied to everybody now.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and that gets to that first slide of the difference between the tax and the fees, because constitutionally, there are a lot of property owners who do not pay property tax, but those same owners do pay user fees. Now, the legislature has historically stepped in at times and said, yes, cities, you have this fee authority, but we're going to regulate it and narrow it. And a perfect example of that is impact fees, which predates me, but doesn't predate, well, it predates almost everybody but Roger. When the legislature stepped in and after cities had won a court case about impact fees, then the legislature came back and said, no, 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 no. Oh, Lynn Pace, you remember that too. You're welcome. And then the legislature came in and said, yes, you can do impact fees, but only under these parameters. Now, the good news is those parameters have stayed with impact fees. They do not apply to other fees. So that could be an outcome here is for, say, the transportation utility fee. It's these parameters, but that doesn't bleed into other fees like stormwater fees. Sean.
Sean Guzman, St. George City, impact fees.
Oh, you remember that too. Sorry.
Only his tenure here, but he was alive when we did those. I just want to point that out. Listen, there's a lot of times when we get proposals that say, let's just do nonprofits and then that'll be okay. But I say this in full disclosure as a board member of my local Intermountain Hospital, St. George Regional Hospital in St. George. However, remember that would include Intermountain as well. And if you look at Salt Lake City, for example, with their new campus that they'll be building on the old Sears site, how much traffic is that going to be driving? When you look at our hospital in St. George, how much traffic does that drive? What are the impacts? How many semaphores did we have to put in? How many lanes do we have to put in? Those types of things. Now, I realize there are other fees that could be charged as they're building those, but just remember they'll continue to generate those traffic. So I just want to say, although the pushback last year, I understand the pushback was from both of those, both the church and also Intermountain. But just know that this will impact other large facilities that are traffic drivers in your jurisdictions. If you just say nonprofit, it sounds like it's kind of an innocent little term, but it'll have an impact.
Well, I appreciate you coming back to the traffic counts because we have heard some people make the argument up here of this is just a way for cities to get around imposing property tax on these non-taxable entities. So it's just a substitute for property tax. If that's your argument in your individual conversations with legislators, we lose. Because the argument needs to be, this is a user fee based on use and based on the impact of the system, based on traffic counts, based on this particular impact that you've studied and gone through a public process on. And if there's an impact and there's a use, then the fee needs to be reasonably related to that use. But again, that's where we're trying to figure out, like, where's everybody legitimately at on this one? And that leads to this third question, which Sean set up nicely, which is if there was a definition that said houses of worship do not pay the user fee, where would you be on this type of proposal? So narrower than the previous question, which Sean was articulating a moment ago. So I'll leave this question open for another few seconds before I pivot. Again, there's no bill to take a position on, but we know there will be House Bill 367 2.0, and there will be a bill coming from the Senate that goes much further than House Bill 367 to make it really difficult, if not impossible, to do transportation utility fees and limit who pays them. Okay. I love the number of Slido results, and they mentioned it a second ago, but I just want to give this a shout out. I confirmed with Roger, we've never had more than 300 people at an LPC meeting, and between the folks online and in the room, we were north of 320 today. So thank you very much for making time to be here and contributing and participating, because that is awesome. Okay, let's do housing and land use. You see, they gave me 5 minutes. I'm going to do my best. So these bills popped out, and these are continuations from last year's bills that we worked on, technical changes around FIZ and HDRZ. Our staff recommendation is to support both of these from Senator Harper. And I want to thank Roger Baker from Tooele. He's the city attorney there. He caught the error in the FIZ bill last spring, which we're fixing here along with a few other technical things. So thank you, Roger. This is the slide I love but hate, and Steve Waldrip referenced it earlier. We're still trying to figure out the next steps around the surplus land issue, particularly the pilot program with UDOT property. So stay tuned. Oh, Len, you're going to cut into my 5 minutes, aren't you? Okay, Megan, will you take the mic to Lynn?
Lynn Pace, Sandy City. Just on these housing bills, a lot of us have been studying this, and even for those of us who have been in the working groups, knowing where those provisions are showing up in these bills is often very confusing. So I don't know who I'm asking this of league staff, but it would be really helpful to have a matrix of all of these housing bills to keep track of which ones are which so we don't get confused.
No, but it's an excellent point, and it's one legislators make all the time, because they say, we know we've passed a lot of stuff, but who knows what they all are? And then I raise my hand and they say, yeah, but we need to go past that. Fair enough. Fair enough. Andrew Hoover knows them too, but that's about it. Right. So House Bill 37, we took position pending on this last week or 2 weeks ago now. We've met with Representative Dunnigan, and we've shared with them our MIHP ownership submenu concept. He's intrigued by it, so we'll have some follow-up conversations with him that could go into what he currently has for that overlay piece. So that ownership submenu came from LPC deliberation throughout the fall. On the additional reporting metrics, he and Steve Waldrip are meeting tomorrow to talk through the reporting metrics that are in phase 1 of the housing plan and what's in Representative Dunnigan's bill. And so we're trying to connect those dots so that we have consistency. Ditto on the regional approach, have consistency between 37 and that. So we're still position pending, but Representative Dunnigan, as always, Mayor Overson has been a rock star in wanting to work together to solve problems here. Okay, House Bill 88. Nothing has changed on this bill, so the recommendation is still to oppose, but House Bill 90 did change this morning. And so we wanted to highlight these two changes because we did switch to position pending online until we had a chance to at least present the changes to this group. Change number 1 is that Representative Ward is striking all the language that would allow housing by right in commercial areas. Change number 2 is changing the definition of small lots from 4,000 square feet by right to 6,000 square feet by right. So in light of those two changes, now this bill really is just small lots by right of 6,000 square feet in all residential zones in all cities within counties of the first and second class. You heard Steve Waldrip at the beginning of the meeting talk about all the legislation having this session and trying to align it with the housing plan. And we anticipate small lots and ADUs and other things are going to be a huge part of that housing plan conversation. We are still anxious as staff about any legislation that preempts some of our land use authority and has negative impacts on our infrastructure without taking that holistic view through the housing plan in the spring and summer. That said, I wanted to be fair to Representative Ward because he's met with our housing group. He's met with me several times. He met with Santa Clara last week for an hour, and he's making adjustments based on what he's been hearing. Staff recommendation would still be to oppose, but we wanted to bring it back for consideration. Norm.
Cam, I know it doesn't say it right now, but it definitely needs to have an ownership and some type of deed restriction to go along with this. We've already done this. We've got 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square foot lots that do not have affordable homes on them and have for years.
So
Norm Beagley, Santa Quin City.
Okay, thank you, Norm. So is that, you want us to engage to try to negotiate on the bill or to still oppose it and have that still be one of the arguments? One. Let's go, Gary Hill.
Gary Hill, Bountiful City. I seem to recall that we were trying to not support any bills that weren't coming out of the combined housing efforts.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
And we appreciate Representative Ward certainly listening to some of our concerns, some in this case, but we definitely appreciate that. But it still seems like it would be inconsistent to support this based on the bigger strategy that we listened to Steve talk about earlier today.
Okay. So I see several nods heading, and we'll continue with oppose as drafted. When you ratify the bill tracker here in a moment, that's what we will update it accordingly because that's what's still on the screen. Any final thoughts there? Okay, I'm past 1:30, but they haven't given me the hook. And then this was not on the agenda, but it's related, so we dropped it this morning. So just acknowledgement there, staff recommendation to oppose, but this is SB 152, which would say cities cannot require garages for houses or townhomes. As a reminder, what we've been discussing with Senator Fillmore and the Commission on Housing Affordability, and this gets to Gary's point of kind of the larger stakeholder conversations, has been A, B, and C. If the house has a garage, it counts. City can't require the garage if the unit's affordable owner occupied, which is similar to what Norm was just saying, and then a standard parking size for house and townhome, but silent on minimums and exterior versus enclosed and accessible tandem spots. So our plan is to still oppose Senator Blumen's bill and continue working with Senator Fillmore. He's not signed on to this approach yet, but I'm meeting with him later this week. Okay. All right. Speaking of land use, Carson, I'll just say thank you. Carson received dozens of city responses on the land use survey, which has been very helpful as we've met with the officers and the board, laying out our strategy for the session. So thank you very much for that, and keep watching for those additional data requests. 2 other slides, and then we'll take the motion, Councilmember Bradshaw, to ratify. Number 1, we wanted to highlight a few key appropriations requests. We generally, as a league, only get involved in appropriations requests if they benefit cities generally. We do not get involved in specific appropriations for Cameron City or Kate City or Carson City. But a couple of these, we wanted to make sure we're on your radar. Number 1, the UDOT surplus property piece. So UDOT's looking for money to help transition that surplus land into owner-occupied affordable housing. Number 2, and this is something UDOT approached us about a few months ago, which we thought made a lot of sense, where UDOT would assume some of the duty at intersections around lighting, even if it was on city roads. So I think that's a perfect example of a strong partnership with UDOT. Number 3, in rural Utah, having these opioid response grants, also one-time funding for Indigent Defense Commission grants. And then we are trying to repurpose the remaining subdivision assistance money from a couple of years ago to assist local governments with other technical assistance. And I was just talking to Steve about what that could look like. So we're trying to preserve that money as city technical assistance funds. And then other issues for future LPCs. We don't have these on the agenda now, but big pieces are moving. One is around potential relocation of billboards, House Bill 198, SB 165 would change the game of how cities can do municipal broadband networks. And then Justin, you want to say something on 249 while I open Slido on billboards? Because
yes,
might as well. So on billboards, here's the question. If your city, if the billboard relocation proximity limit in state law changed from the status quo, which is a mile in each direction from its current spot, to anywhere in a commercial or industrial zone on the same highway, what would that impact be on your city? So we're trying to get a sense of who would be impacted. And then this morning I met with the outdoor advertising industry to understand the problem they're trying to solve. And it starts with the expansion of I-15 in Southern Davis County and Northern Salt Lake County and a bunch of impacted billboards there. So our main question for you is, what's the impact in your city, so we can follow up and discuss next steps. And Justin, I'll let you talk nuclear and then we'll ratify. Thanks everybody for being here. Record-setting LPC, so thank you everybody.
All right. Oh, don't clap yet. We got to rush through some things. So 249 is creates a nuclear commission, but also puts some limitations on city and counties, giving any kind of financial incentives around energy projects. That one's in committee this afternoon. We're going to talk to Representative Albrecht about it. Just want to make sure you know it's on our radars that we're talking about it. We may have to come back about and talk about that one later. There are dozens and dozens of other bills that we're tracking and looking at. Again, there's a lot of no positions, position pendings as we're working through the bill tracker, but please reach out to us about any specific bills that you want to make sure that we're looking at, talking about. And with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Bradshaw. First Vice President.
So first housekeeping note, please take your garbage with you when you leave so that we continue to be able to use this room. There's a committee meeting immediately following, and we are here because of the state Senate allowing us to be here. So take your garbage, find a can. Good luck with finding a can. With that, I would love to entertain a motion to approve the bill tracker as presented. Oh, we have a discussion item first.
Yes, we're updating that right now.
And make sure all of you read it. What that does to you.
So we have a comment from Mike Blackham from Kaysville, who wants to make sure that we are opposing House Bill 90. The staff has confirmed that the tracker now reflects that. So with that, I'll go back to, I saw a motion from Mayor Tran to approve the tracker. Do we have a second? We have a second from Richard Higginson from Bountiful. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? We have one no. All right, but it still passes. So we will we will see you all next week. Take your garbage.
Perfect.